Are we living in, this is like one of those bar stool conversations, but it's pretty good. It's pretty relevant, actually. It's a lot to think about, but it's kind of the fun part of nerding out on football. So here you go. Are we living in the greatest quarterback generation? And let's just take the 70s and move forward. I don't want to do any of this Sammy Boss stuff or whatever from the 1940s. So let's just go really 70s and 80s and start moving forward. So is it the greatest generation of quarterbacks? Now, a lot of people think so, and you're probably going to hear it pretty often. My answer is no, not yet. This generation might be one day, but it's not there yet. A couple of them are already on the list, but not collectively. But here's why it's really interesting right now, and everybody can go back in time. So Yahoo Sports had a story that came out today, and it does make you think about the quarterback generations. Really can break it down by decades, to be honest. But these generations of quarterbacks, these time periods, right? This snapshot of the NFL in each decade. And so it was a really good story, talking about Brady retiring, and there goes the end of that group, that generation of players. And it's true. And I'll go through it. So I'll start the argument by saying, if you factor in, what does that mean, the greatest generation? Well, come up with your own terms, okay? I think most people would agree on most of them. I don't think it's all that debatable, but what you're really talking about is players over time, quarterbacks over time, putting up great passing numbers. That's not it. Also putting up a great winning percentage. They're winning championships. And then what I think you also have to do, which I don't think is that difficult, it passes the eyeball test almost every time, and that is, and this is what you really noticed with Tom Brady's career over time, and that is this. It's completely subjective. The championships, the passing numbers, the winning percentage, the quarterback rating, all that stuff's not. This is. And the subjective variable is, what did they do with what was around them? One of the things that you can always say about Brady's career is, not saying he had players. We can't say Gronkowski and Letterman weren't great players, but he did it with, it was a turnstile of players that he kept making better and better and better. It's really, to me, what stands out about Brady. It didn't matter who you stuck out there. He was going to make them look great. So the best of all, we'll just start with this. This way you can just start arguing, do whatever you want to do. I don't think it's that much of a debate, but I'll set it off. The 5 best of all time at the quarterback position are, and I think in order, are Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Dan Marino, John Elway, and then you can have these two interchangeable with like a hyphen. Peyton Manning / Drew Brees. Stop. There. That 5, 6, 5.5, whatever you want to say, I don't think it's that debatable, but go ahead. Now, some people are going to argue when he's done, whether it's this year, the next, or whenever, Aaron Rodgers might be in that group, and he might be, and that's the point of what the Yahoo story was about. The next group, after those 6, I'll put 2 guys in at number 5, but the next group after those 5, in my opinion, would be, even though he didn't put up championships by any stretch, but his numbers were ridiculous. And I don't know why. I feel like I'm the only guy that ever talks about Warren Moon. But the next group of greats would be, in kind of an order, but we can argue, Warren Moon, Troy Aikman, Patrick Mahomes already. That's like this next group of guys there. So this is what Yahoo did the story. And then we can talk about how this generation, what's this current generation of players, where they're going to fit. Says NFL Power Rankings with Tom Brady gone, Aaron Rodgers is the last of the greatest generation. And I don't think we look at it that way because of Brady's time and Peyton Manning's time. I don't think we looked at their careers in this sort of timestamp. I don't think we've really thought about that group of guys. And it really is the greatest generation of quarterbacks. And Aaron Rodgers is in that group. The fact that he's hanging around and stuff, that's kind of irrelevant now. I think we we don't understand how great that group was. And then as soon as you say that, somebody will introduce the group that's playing right now, and I don't think it's that far off. So here's the Yahoo story, and then we can jump into names and that whole barstool debate thing. For a few years, the NFL had a perfect mix of old and new at quarterback. A group of Hall of Famers who came into the NFL 20 to 25 years ago were still playing well in their 30s. A new wave, led by Patrick Mahomes, was making its mark at the same time. In terms of the number of big stars at quarterback, the NFL was arguably never better. True. The star power is, I would tell you, the star power alone right now might be the greatest generation. But in terms of mega star power, it's that group of Brady, Manning, Rodgers, Breeze. But I'm going to argue something that I'm not sure people quite think about. That Brady group, that generation, has the greatest star power. The generation right now has more really good quarterbacks. There are more borderline great quarterbacks than ever before. They're just not mega stars yet like Brady, Rodgers, Manning, and Breeze. The older stars started to retire. Peyton Manning was gone after 2015. Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, Eli Manning, Drew Brees, Matt Ryan followed. Andrew Luck did too, although he quit far too soon. Then Tom Brady retired for good. Or did he? I think he did. I'm sure next week I'll change my mind again. As soon as someone on a desirable team gets hurt, I might change my mind again, but I think he's done for good. He acts like it. He keeps buying soccer teams. That's like the ultimate sign of retirement. It's the new trendy thing to do with rich athletes. Buy into a soccer team. He just bought into, I think it's Birmingham City, and J.J. Watt bought into a team. It's weird. It's the trendy thing to do. Tom Brady retires for the first time since 1997. Think about this. When Warren Moon, John Elway, Dan Marino, and Steve Young were among the NFL's top passers, we'll have an NFL season start without Brady or a Manning. I mean, it's been a long... Think about that. When was the last time we started a season without a Brady or a Manning? That's why it is kind of a cool debate, because it's all changing now. Assuming he's really gone, I think he will be. So here we go. Let's do this thing. I'll break them. I'll do it by decades. I don't think it's that difficult. The first part, okay, we'll do it by generation, which is kind of decades. Blocks of time of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. All right? And if you go pre-1970, I'm just going to tell you to shut up, whatever, don't care. But even if you start at the 70s, you start at the 70s, the greatest generations, the greatest group of quarterbacks in the 70s, if you ask by decade, I think the 70s goes like this. That would have been Roger Staubach, Fran Tarkenton, and Terry Bradshaw. Although Terry Bradshaw, with all the skills and cannon for an arm, and I know you don't see him as a player anymore, most people don't, but he was very Aikman-like, okay? And what I mean by that is he played at a time with a generational skill set of players around him, unlike anything you've ever seen. You know, people, to be fair, yes, Aikman was a great passer. Yes, Aikman won championships. He was also surrounded by a ridiculous collection of talent. Same with Terry Bradshaw. Now, they won with them. I get all that. I'm not saying you leave them off a top list, but there are very few guys, honestly, outside of Montana, Bradshaw, and Aikman that have ever played with a better group. A ridiculous group, more Hall of Famers. But either way, you go to the 70s, you go Staubach, Tarkenton, Bradshaw. Staubach is one of those guys that I think if you took him at his peak and stuck him in today, he'd be a star today. He'd probably get hurt quite a bit. Great athlete, giant arm, knew the game well, ultimate competitor. Not quite the runner that Lamar Jackson is, but had a better arm. I just find him a similar type of player. He would be like, he was ahead of his time. He's that super athlete playing quarterback that happened to have a cannon arm too. So that's the best of the 70s. The 80s easily would have been Dan Marino, Joe Montana, Dan Fouts, and John Elway. Done. Don't argue. Don't. That's a no-brainer. I mean, you're going to work hard for somebody else, go ahead, that's fine. So that's probably, Montana, Marino, Fouts, Elway, and some sort of combination there. And then you get to the 90s. The 90s were better than people thought, but it wasn't very deep. In the 90s, you're going to make fun of me. I'm going to do this Warren Moon thing again. The 90s, I think, went Warren Moon. I know we didn't win a lot. Okay, I get it. You take points off because he didn't win a lot. It wasn't his fault his team decided to blow a lead in Buffalo, okay? I'm just telling you. But in terms of just passing numbers, pure passer, completion percentage, he did win a lot of games. I mean, there was a lot of stats there that are just ridiculous. And I think he's the second best pure passer ever to play, just throwing the ball. But the 90s would have been Warren Moon, Steve Young, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, and again, Elway. Yeah. You're not wrong, by the way. If you said, what about Aikman? Yeah, okay, fine. And you're going to say, well, what about Favre? That's okay, too. You're not wrong. There's the greatest collection of that time period. Then you get to the 2000s, early part of 2000s. It's a group, arguably the least depth of any period that I can think of for quarterbacks. And I don't know why. It was almost a running back kind of time in the early 2000s. But you go Carson Palmer, Kurt Warner, Eli Manning, Brett Favre, a good time period, but not as good as the group of the 80s. Not very deep. Frankly, I'm not even sure it's as good as the group of the 90s. I don't even think so. Early 2000s. Then you get what a lot of people think is the greatest generation until now. The greatest generation of quarterbacks. And that's this time period that's just ended. That's what the story's about at Yahoo. And I guess that would be the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years. Remember, you haven't had a season start without A. Manning and A. Brady in 20-something years. So that time period was Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, and Aaron Rodgers. The bullpen of that group is Ben Roethlisberger, Carson Palmer, Phillip Rivers. The last 20 years of quarterback position is the greatest generation of quarterback play, unless we're going to argue about now. In ranking them, it's that period, then I think the 80s, and then you get to the 90s. So then it's present day, which is where a lot of people are going to jump off and start to argue. Are we nerding out enough yet? You want to nerd out some more? At least I'm not overwhelming you with stats. Then you get to present day. And here's the thing about present day. It's super top heavy. But in terms of great players, you don't know on a bunch of these guys. I think people are getting a little over their skis to end up comparing this to the last 20 years. You can't do that yet, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. Where would this present-day generation be? The top two will be considered among the 10 best before they're done, in my opinion. Now, that's absent injuries in the next few years. But the top two, I'm betting they end up being among the top 5 or 7 of all time. I do. And that's going to be Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. They've separated themselves from everybody. They're chasing that top 10 ranking of all time. They're not there yet. They're not, but they're well on their way. Anyone could see it. Those two have separated themselves from the current generation of players. The rest of the present-day generation, I think, it makes it the deepest generation, the deepest time period for the NFL of really, really good quarterbacks. There's just more of them. Now, you could argue, well, the rules favor quarterbacks now. I mean, all that stuff is true. But, I mean, you just got to do a snapshot of time. And the snapshot of time present day is there are just so many of them. So many really good guys. You're pissed if you don't have a great quarterback now. You're pissed if you have Dak Prescott, who's pretty good. That's how good present day is. But it's not the best generation. So this time period, I think, is going to have two of the greatest, for sure. I mean, we've never seen this many really good quarterbacks, though. That doesn't mean they're Elway, doesn't mean they're Marino, doesn't mean they're Brady yet, but it's a bunch of really, really good players. It's the deepest talent pool the NFL has ever had. That's why the NFL is more interesting than it's ever been. In order they go now, it goes Mahomes, Burrow, stop, got to go down a couple notches. There's a pecking order here. Those two have separated. Those two, within probably 3 to 4 or 5 years, you're going to start talking about them like Marino, like not quite Brady yet, but they're going to be in that conversation. So there's Mahomes and Burrow separate. Then you get to this next level that is a lot closer than people think, and that's Justin Herbert. He is having the most spectacular young career of a player that no one seems to notice because he's in suburban L.A. and nobody cares. Now, he's currently, until Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes do their contracts, he's currently the highest paid player in the NFL. He plays for the Chargers, and you don't even know what he's done. The guy almost passed for 5,000 yards last season, and he didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver, which almost feels mathematically impossible. So then there's him, and I think he's just this freakishly good, talented player with a meathead of a coach who just can't help him. But he's even putting up grotesque numbers. And then it's Jalen Hurts. Then you get to Lamar Jackson. Yes, Aaron Rodgers still. I think he's still a top 8. Then it's Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence. So then you've got that group. You got two that separate. You got a group of great young players, one old. And then you go to a next level. Those are all really, really good talents. The next level is really good too. It's just not to their level. And that next level is Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Geno Smith. Aaron Rodgers will be considered a top 12 of all time, maybe even higher. Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow will be among the top 5 sooner or later. Mahomes will be there really quickly just because he just keeps racking up championships. But Burrow won't be that far behind. He'll be a top 12 of all time. But think about the entire group. I mean, you go back over time. You got that period there. You got 2 periods where you had the 80s and early 2000s that are defined by the greatest players ever at the position. Then you get to today, and you've got 2 great ones and a bunch of really good players all over the league. Several of the guys now, I think are going to end up another decade from now. I think we're going to end up saying there's several of the guys now, besides just Mahomes and Burrow, I think they'll be among the top 50. I think 2 more guys from this generation will end up among the top 50.